What's up, everybody? It's Jared with Capture the Magic, and the other day in a video we talked about the rumor out there that Warner Brothers is currently looking to potentially make a deal with Universal Studios and Comcast for the DC theme park rights to bring the DC comic book characters into the Universal Studios theme parks. And this story kind of flew under the radar as it came out just before the deal with Netflix and Warner Brothers was announced, which of course that ate up a lot of the attention. But this is starting to gain some traction. You're seeing a lot more people talk about this. And in today's video, we're going to talk about some of the scenarios if Universal were to get the DC theme park rights, what they might do with them, and should Disney be worried if Universal does get the DC theme park rights. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. So to get everybody up to speed, this entire, idea and video is off the topic of Bloomberg had an article about Warner Brothers is exploring the licensing rights to DC to the Universal theme park. So in the article, they don't have a lot of information about this, but they basically say Warner Brothers Discovery is in talks with theme park operators to license its DC comic book heroes for new rides, and they name specifically talking to Comcast. It says the company currently licenses its DC properties to Six Flags, but it's exploring the possibility of partnering with additional operators. It says adding DC's intellectual property would be a major win for any hospitality company, including Universal Parks business, which already licenses Harry Potter imagery and characters from Warner Brothers. They don't go into specifics about the agreement with Six Flags, what sort of implications would that be, but it seems like for whatever that's worth, they are exploring, I suppose, removing those rights from Six Flags and giving them to somebody else, in this situation, Comcast. And we do know Brian Roberts, the CEO or co-CEO of Comcast, has met with David Zaslav, who is the CEO of Warner Brothers. They've met a few times during this whole merger talk, and one has to wonder if this was maybe the reason that Comcast really wanted to get involved, was to get these rights and potentially protect the Harry Potter rights. So this could be a consolation prize for Comcast, as it doesn't look like they are going to end up with Warner Brothers. So this is, obviously Bloomberg's talking about this. Other outlets are talking about this. So this is a potential reality that this could happen and come to the Universal theme parks. So initially I was going to do this video, kind of read through this article. This article is one of the most ill-informed articles that I have ever seen somebody write on a topic that is about theme parks. They talk in this article mostly about the comic book impact of this, which I don't believe would be hardly any, considering this is not anything about comic book rights. They also talk about this as if Six Flags could then get the rights to Marvel. It's like no understanding of the theme park landscape. It's kind of a nonsensical article in many ways. But the main question that I do want to talk about that this article does not answer is if Universal was able to get the rights to DC for its theme parks, should Disney be worried about that? And I believe the answer to that is it depends. They might be worried about this depending on what Universal would decide to do if they do end up getting the DC licensing rights for the theme parks. Again, this is all, hypothetical. We don't know if Universal is going to end up with these DC theme park rights. But if they did, Universal would have a very interesting decision to make that would obviously affect Disney, which is the fact that Universal has Marvel Superhero Island. Now that land is, like I like to call, a time capsule. Universal can't really expand it because Disney owns Marvel, which would take approval from Marvel, aka Disney, if they wanted to, say, add a new attraction to that land, and Disney is not going to play along. And the way that that contract is set up, which is from the 90s, is Universal has the rights to Marvel east of the Mississippi in their theme parks in perpetuity. They don't have to renew that deal. It is just there as long as Universal pays the yearly fee, and as long as they keep up that land and whatever specifics are in that contract. They have to keep it up to a certain level. They can update attractions like they did with Hulk not that long ago. They've done that with Spider-Man to make it, update it so that the ride is still good and things of that nature, but they're not going to be able to add anything to it. So this land is essentially something that you're just holding on to in many ways to keep it out of Disney's hands, because obviously if Universal relinquishes these rights, Disney then takes them and is very likely going to put Marvel into Disney World, as they've already done in Disneyland. So if Universal is able to get these DC rights, would they replace Marvel Superhero Island with DC and let the rights go back to Disney, or Disney pays a bunch of money to get those Marvel rights? It's a scenario that is more plausible now than it would have been for sure, say 5 years ago when the MCU was at its absolute peak. There's lots of question marks around the MCU. You have Doomsday coming up, which is probably going to do very well, but it's also going to do very well because of Robert Downey Jr., you have Chris Evans going to come back. It's going to have a lot of the old school MCU characters that people know and love as kind of a send-off. I'm going to assume this is likely, never say never, but very likely this is going to be the last movie that some of these actors like Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans and the like are going to be in when it comes to Marvel, as sort of a send-off in many ways, and probably come to an end of this current era of the MCU. So there's lots of question marks around the future of the MCU, and I've always contended they're not going to be able to capture lightning in a bottle twice. You're not going to be able to have an MCU 2.0 that's just as successful as its initial run was. We're probably never going to see anything like that again. It was just sort of a once-in-a-lifetime type of thing that took place when the MCU really came to prominence. So if you're Universal and you're looking at a scenario where you might look at getting rid of Marvel Superhero Island in a situation that would make sense, getting the rights to DC would be step one, because the first thing you'd ever do if you're looking at potentially replacing Marvel Superhero Island would simply be, do we have something that is the equivalent or potentially better in terms of actually having a draw for our theme parks, in this case, Islands of Adventure? Because I would argue Marvel Superhero Island, while I love it, it's the era of the comics that I grew up in, it's not a major draw. People, for the most part, are not clamoring to go to Universal Studios to go see Marvel Superhero Island like they are, say, for the Wizarding Worlds of Harry Potter, for Epic Universe, Super Nintendo World, and those things. So it's not on that tier. And essentially, if you were going to replace this, you could replace it with something that would be an actual draw, which DC in Islands of Adventure, if they were able to do a full land from scratch and really let Universal Creative just go wild with this, could potentially become a very massive draw. So if you're looking at a scenario where they could potentially get rid of Marvel Superhero Island, this would be one they would think about. Now, of course, if they relinquish those rights, it goes to Disney, and then Disney, of course, at some point is going to put Marvel into Disney World. And now I think that would probably take better part of a decade before they would ever get around to it, considering all of the things they're currently constructing. So the gamble there is that the MCU hit its peak, it's on its downturn, and yeah, they're going to put it into their parks, but how much of a draw would it really be? Because you would be handing your biggest competitor a major IP that they could use against you. So that is the gamble there. And Universal could look at this and say, we're tired of just having this land here that we can't do anything with, that is a time capsule. We want to do something in this area that is an actual draw that we completely control, and just no longer placating and just having this area to keep it out of Disney's hands. They could come to that conclusion. But if you're looking at a scenario where Marvel Superhero Island would be replaced, this is likely the type of scenario and the timing of where Marvel currently is that you could look at this and, you could see the pros and cons of it. The other scenario that is there is that Universal keeps Marvel Superhero Island, even though it is a time capsule. They can't really do anything with it, but it does keep it out of Disney's hands. And then you build a DC land in another area of your resort, whether that's in Islands of Adventure. There are some areas that you could do that. Toon Lagoon comes to mind. And at this point, Lost Continent is going to have Pokemon come in there. So you could have Pokemon, you could have Marvel Superhero Island, and you could have DC in Islands of Adventure, which would be a pretty great lineup to go alongside with the Wizarding Worlds of Harry Potter, Jurassic Park, and then you have Seuss Landing. Assuming that they would put DC into Toon Lagoon. You look at the studio side, there's questions about The Simpsons, what that area will become, as originally that was rumored to be Pokemon. You could put DC in there. And then, of course, you could also just put DC in Epic Universe and have its own land there. There is a space for that where they could do that. So Universal has options if they want to keep Marvel Superhero Island and add DC to the lineup. And then Universal Studios becomes the superhero headquarters for the theme parks on the East Coast. You have DC, you have Marvel, and then you don't allow Disney to have Marvel back, and then you basically have cornered the market on comic book characters in theme parks. And given what Universal has shown they're able to do with the Wizarding Worlds and Epic Universe, I personally would be very excited to see what Universal would come up with a DC land. You could have Gotham City, you could have Metropolis, obviously these iconic characters. Like the possibilities of what they could do are kind of endless. I mean, you could do some really, really cool stuff with these characters in a theme park on the level that Universal Creative can do. And that scenario is pretty appealing. Even though you can't really do much with Marvel Superhero Island, you would have all those properties under your belt that you could then maybe, in a marketing campaign, you obviously have DC, but you could market that we are the home for superheroes, DC and Marvel, and you can come to Universal Studios and check out all these characters. Now, the question I think in that scenario would be, what type of DC land do you do? Do you do it under the current iteration of the DC movie landscape with James Gunn's DC, which you've only had one movie there? I was not a fan of that movie. You have the Snyderverse, which I don't think they would do that. You have Nolan's Batman, but that only includes Batman. And then you could just base it off of the comic books. So Universal coming to a decision how they would do this, if they kept both Marvel and DC in the theme parks, it might make some sense to set up DC in a land that you build for that, based strictly off the comics, to kind of have some sort of continuity between Marvel and DC in the theme parks. But obviously there's a lot of things they could do there. But I do think if they went that scenario, that would give them quite the leg up. And I think if you're looking at a scenario where would Disney be worried about DC in their theme parks, I don't think it would be as much of a concern to Disney if they were able to get those Marvel rights back. I think if Universal decided to give them up and let Disney have them, I don't think Disney would be that concerned, because the MCU still does have appeal, and you could build a land at Disney World that's based off of some of the peak, Marvel MCU timelines and movies that they did. Those could become major draws. You have the ability to do Iron Man and Captain America and Thor. But the more I've thought about it, it would be an ultimate move by Universal to keep Marvel Superhero Island, add DC to your lineup, and go about it that way. And if that scenario took place, that would worry Disney, because they would literally have no answer for DC and Marvel in the Universal theme park. And then you throw in Super Nintendo World, and I've made the argument many times that I think Nintendo in the Universal parks is potentially going to be a bigger deal for Universal than the Wizarding Worlds even were. And there's also no answer for Nintendo in the theme parks also. Disney is going to try and do video games in their theme parks, very likely Fortnite and Epic Games, but nothing is going to match Nintendo and its nostalgia and its current pop culture relevance. And you throw in the movie side of things, there's really no answer for Nintendo, and there's really no answer for Harry Potter either. Disney has tried to do lands very similar to the Wizarding Worlds, and in my opinion, they have not done as well as Universal. Pandora is a great land, but I think Galaxy's Edge is a massive swing and a miss when it comes to an immersive land that you could have done for Star Wars. I think the better move would be to maintain Marvel Superhero Island, add DC to your parks, and you would really corner the market on the superheroes. That would worry Disney. They would have no answer for it. They might be able to do, again, they have Guardians of the Galaxy. They have little things they can pick and choose from, but you're not allowing your biggest competitor to have the rights to use these major popular characters in their theme parks. That would become a draw. But as a whole, they're really stuck. They couldn't do anything on the comic book side, and they would be forced to try and come up with something else as a way to compete with this. On top of already having Nintendo and the Wizarding Worlds of Harry Potter, it would give Universal yet another thing that Disney would not really have an answer for. And the more things that Universal can come up with their theme parks that their biggest competitor does not have an answer for, is only going to help Universal continue to grow and eat into more market share. And like I've said many times, I think we're well on our way to Universal and Disney being co-leaders in the theme park market space. And I think when you look at it this way, if they added DC to the lineup, that would make it even quicker on what they would do, on top of the fact that they've already announced they're adding things to Epic Universe. Wizarding World of Harry Potter is getting an expansion. I was also told Super Nintendo World is getting an expansion, very likely to be Zelda. So you're already talking about adding major things to your theme parks even before you start talking about DC potentially coming in. And I think all of these things combined, if they were able to do that, you look at this in 5 to 10 years, Universal could have major advantages in their theme parks that Disney simply has no answer for. So to answer the question, if Universal gets the rights to DC in the theme parks, should Disney be worried? They should, if Universal decides to keep Marvel Superhero Island and also add DC to that lineup. That would be worrisome for them. That is a scenario that Disney would definitely hate. And then you have to ask your question, would Disney at that point be willing to pay whatever the price tag is for Marvel for the theme park rights? Would they be willing to pay that to get them to the Disney parks? And I don't know what that price tag is. I would assume there is a price tag that Universal would be willing to part with it. I'm going to assume you're talking into the billions of dollars here, considering you're looking at Warner Brothers at this point. The bids are up to $108 billion for that. As high as some of these prices are going, I think Universal could command a very hefty price tag. So if Disney was willing to pay enough money for this, I think Universal would have a conversation about that. Now, I don't know what the price tag would be in terms of offsetting whatever popularity that Marvel would go over to Disney World. So I would say there's a price tag, but maybe Universal would simply say, yeah, we don't really care. There's not enough money you could pay us for this, unless you're talking just some extraordinarily insane amount of money that would be dumb to turn down, that would make up for any difference of whatever advantage Disney might get for having Marvel. That is the only scenario I think in that situation, if I was Universal, that I would be looking at giving up Marvel. And the more I've thought about this the last few days, the more I've just come to the absolute conclusion that I don't think there's any way Universal should give up these Marvel rights, considering what Disney would likely do with them down the road. So it's an interesting conversation. And of course, at this point, it's all just a hypothetical situation. It is starting to get a lot more traction. A lot more people are picking up on this. But if this does take place, this could be something that really does change the landscape of theme parks. Maybe on the level of Wizarding Worlds coming to Universal, maybe on the same level as Nintendo coming to Universal, DC coming in on top of having Marvel in the theme parks could be something on that level as well. So we'll have to wait and see what else comes of this if this ends up happening, if Universal gets these rights to DC. But potentially this would be a game changer, and potentially Disney should be very worried about this if that does happen and Universal does not give up those Marvel rights. But when anything else breaks on this, there's any actual news on this that in terms of actually happening or, finalized talks or anything like that, we will talk about on here and let you know about it. But for now, that is going to be it, though, for this video. So if you like this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel as we do lots of coverage here of Universal Studios, Epic Universe, Disney World, and pop culture. And let us know in the comments, if Universal were to get the theme park rights to DC, should they get rid of Marvel Superhero Island, or should they keep it and add DC to the lineup? And until next time, we will see you in the parks.